When we think of nightmares today, we think only of bad dreams. But long ago, the nightmare was understood to be something altogether more terrifying. It was a visitation, a dark entity staring from the corner of the room, swallowing the light, or crouched upon your chest as you tried to sleep, its bony hands around your throat. Today we call this sleep paralysis and treat these visitors as nothing more than hallucinations. But there's something deeply unsettling about these visitors that cannot be fully explained. Across the world, and across the ages, these visitors are almost always the same. They are the Old Hag and the Hat Man. So who are these terrifying entities? Are they really only hallucinations? And if so, why is it always them? Hi everybody, and welcome back to Beasts of the Old World, a channel all about ancient folklore and mythical creatures from across the globe. I'm Nick, and today we're looking at the folklore surrounding nightmares and sleep paralysis demons, and asking if there's more going on here than simply bad dreams. As always, dropping a like and a comment on the video is enormously helpful to the channel, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and set notifications so that you catch new uploads when they come. And with that said, let's get into it. Long ago, if someone said they'd had a nightmare, people understood that they'd woken up, unable to move, struggling to breathe, and with a crushing weight upon their chest. In Old Norse it was called the Mara, in Old English, the Mira. This wasn't just a bad dream, but a visitation from something malevolent, something evil. The root of the word nightmare runs deep. We get mare from Proto-European word mor, which describes a malicious female spirit. We also find the word mer, an old verb meaning to die, and moran, meaning the crusher. A nightmare would sit upon its victim's chest as they slept, sometimes even strangle them. Indeed, early Greek writers called it the throttle. In almost every case, the victim lay there paralysed, unable to resist or cry out. In Christian Europe, the nightmare took the form of a demon. Some demons were small and impish, but others, such as the Incubus and Succubus, were more human-like, and were said to visit their victims in the night and lie with them, or upon them. By the early modern period, the demonic imagery had morphed towards that of the witch. The Germans began to call it Hexendrücken, witch-pressing. In England, a victim was said to have been hag-ridden. These beliefs made their way over to the US too. In the Salem witch trials of 1692, men testified to being crushed and unable to move for hours, certain that a witch was sitting upon them. In fact, for a few hundred years, and all over the world, people have reported waking up with a dark, shadowy, wrinkled old woman perched upon their chest, staring into their face, sometimes with her hands around their throat. Folk were so terrified of her that they slept with Bibles under the pillows. Others went a step further, strapping nail-studded hag-boards across their chests to keep the night hag away while they slept. In more modern times, darker shapes have become more common. Figures without faces at all, forms that flicker at the edge of vision, darker than darkness itself. These have come to be called the shadow people, and among them, one figure looms larger than any other. A tall, faceless man with a wide-brimmed hat, watching silently from the corner. The infamous Hat Man. Unlike the Old Hag, the Hat Man doesn't sit upon your chest, though you may still struggle for breath. Instead, he just waits. In the shadows at the end of the bed, he stands there, watching, grinning an evil, invisible smile you just know is there, even if you can't see it. All this raises an interesting question. Be it the demon of ancient times, the hag-like witch that followed, or the shadow people of today, across 1,000 years, across languages and cultures, there is almost always someone watching from the darkness when we experience sleep paralysis. And they're almost always the same. So what are they? Are these entities simply the way our brains dress the fear of paralysis? Or are we experiencing something older? Something demonic? Something we don't understand? Now, those who follow the channel closely will know that a roundabout now is usually where I insert an old folk tale to illustrate the topic, but in this case, I don't need to. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I had my own sleep paralysis episode. Not that I knew that's what it was at the time. I woke up on my side, facing the wall. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move. I also woke up with the absolute certainty that I was being watched. And worse still, it felt as though the bed itself had a heavy weight in it, which I could feel at my back. Obviously, I was utterly terrified. All I could do was stare at the wall. I remember the curtains fluttering softly in the draft. I remember focusing on it to try and take my mind off things. The paralysis and the fear that came with it seemed to last all night, and after a while, I started trying to convince myself that I was being silly and imagining things, but this sense of a figure behind me wouldn't go away. I could feel it staring at me, if that makes sense. Anyway, when I finally plucked up the courage to move, I couldn't. It was as though I was being held. And then I heard a low, guttural growl. I instantly understood that this thing knew I'd tried to move, and that if I tried to move again, that would be it. I'd be done for. I stayed awake all night, praying for the sun to come up, and whether I couldn't move or just didn't dare to, I can't say. But it was long after the sun came up that I finally dared to look again. And when I eventually did, there was nothing there. Modern medicine has an explanation for these terrifying experiences. When we dream, the body shuts itself down. This is called REM atonia, a kind of safety lock so that you don't leap out of bed and act out your dreams. But sometimes the mind wakes up before the body does. You open your eyes, but the lock hasn't lifted. So you're conscious, but you're paralyzed. Now, paralysis alone is terrifying, but researchers believe that the brain goes one step further in this instance. Studies suggest that in sensing your defenselessness, the mind triggers what's called the threat-activated vigilance system. In scanning for threats, but finding none, the mind then floods with predator imagery. It's a guess, but maybe it's better to imagine a threat that isn't really there than to fail to notice a real one. These systems may well explain why we can't move, and why we might find it difficult to breathe. They might even explain why we see something in the dark. But if sleep paralysis really is just a misfiring brain, then why do the same figures appear again and again? One explanation lies in the theory of cultural priming, which claims that we simply see what we expect to see. In Egypt, for example, the pressing spirit is often seen as a jinni. In Japan, they call it kanashibari, meaning bound in metal, and attribute it to one of the yokai. In 20th century America, sleep paralysis became increasingly associated with alien abduction stories. So perhaps the culture provides the mask, and the brain obligingly paints it onto the fear. Maybe that's all there is to it. When early modern Europe was obsessed with and terrified of witches, is it any wonder that a crone-like image was the thing that people's minds manifested in these terrifying moments? In post-Roswell America, should we really be surprised that aliens were suddenly taking the blame where the threat of evil witches was no longer taken seriously? When read in this way, these creatures give us an insight into the culturally inherited fears of people across the ages. Today, reports of the Hat Man in particular are far more common than any other figure. Many of us suffer with broken sleep and lead fractured lives. Shift work, burnout, anxiety, the endless pull of glowing screens at midnight, all work to keep us restless, exhausted, half awake. The Hat Man experience is especially common among people who use sedatives like Benadryl to force sleep. The result is often a fractured sleep cycle and a mind pulled violently across the threshold where the Hat Man waits. The question is, why is the Hat Man the thing we now see the most? What does this say about us? Carl Jung might argue that, as a shadow person, the Hat Man represents the dark part of ourselves that we fear to confront. The guilt, the dread, the dark impulses that we repress. But what if, as with earlier nightmares, the dark, anonymous, faceless man staring from the shadows is a mirror of what we fear today? The unseen decision-makers and hidden systems, the opaque algorithms and dark cultural or political forces that operate just out of sight. Perhaps his prevalence hints at our growing distrust of these figures, or at our creeping suspicion that something in our world is broken. We sense that something's wrong in our society, that unseen forces gather at the edges of our lives, but we do nothing. We're paralysed. Maybe we're right to be wary. After all, the philosopher Nietzsche famously warned us to battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster, before adding, even more chillingly, that if you should gaze into the abyss, know that the abyss gazes also into you. Perhaps we're all lying frozen in our beds, the abyss all around us, the darkness closing in. We know the monsters watch us from the shadows, monitoring our habits, our routines, our whereabouts. They listen in on everything we do, and then tell us where to shop, what to buy, what to think. They even tell us who to vote for. They're here, with us even in the places we feel the safest, our own homes, watching us from the shadows at the end of our beds. We know it, even if we can't quite see it. We feel the weight grow upon our chests. We feel ourselves slowly suffocating. But we can do nothing. Maybe it's because the monsters won't let us. But perhaps it's because we don't even want to look too closely at what stirs in the shadows. The Hat Man may well be terrifying to behold, but whether he's the darkest part of ourselves, or the faceless, unknowable shadow of those who rule unseen, one thing is certain. He watches, he waits, and he never blinks. Despite being an unquestionably terrifying experience, medically speaking, there are no recorded cases of death resulting directly from sleep paralysis. So maybe the lesson of the Hat Man is this. It is in our paralysis, in our refusal to confront the darkness, that he gains his power. As soon as we overcome our fear, as soon as we take action, his illusion is broken. So the question is, if you should wake one night to find the Hat Man, or some other monster, has come for you, will you too be paralysed? Or will you look straight into the abyss, knowing full well what gazes back?